Welcome to this week's edition of Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. This week we have a member of the Judiciary Committee. We have a Republican. Many of the Democrats that we tried to reach out to were just not available this week. But it's been my experience that there's a lot of agreement on the panel. Let me introduce our guest to you. State Representative John Shaban is a Republican, 135th District, which includes Easton, Reading, and Weston. Thank you for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
This committee has very interesting issues before it, always.
Yep.
And so it's a real smorgasbord. Let me just throw them out to you and see what you think. One of the bills you're addressing is protecting children under the age of 18 from secondhand smoke while riding in a motor vehicle.
Yeah, that was a good one. We spent a fair amount of time on that earlier in the week. The goal of it obviously is laudable. I mean, you shouldn't, to the best you can, you don't want to expose anyone, let alone children, to secondhand smoke. But the bill is currently constructed, and this is what the debate focused on, is problematic because it doesn't, in my opinion anyway, it doesn't have a real good definition of what the police should or should not do in connection with, you see someone driving down the street and they have their 17-year-old kid sitting next to them and somebody's smoking, not sure who, could be either of them frankly, but that creates reasonable suspicion in order to make a traffic stop, which in order to write an infraction, a ticket, which triggers a whole bunch of other requirements and potential issues about actually stopping someone from moving about, in a free manner. You may recall a year or two ago we passed a bill. I forget there was a gentleman's name attached to it. I think a congressman from the U.S. Congress. But we're now we require our police officers in Connecticut now, if there's a stop and there's a minority driver, they have to, and potential in a number of circumstances, they have to fill out a big batch of paperwork in order to try and track racial profiling. Mm-hmm. Well, now if it's somebody who's smoking who potentially is also a minority or is a minority, that is going to trigger another cascade of paperwork and a cascade of issues that I'm not sure is the direction we want to go in. And really, the real problem with it, and this is, folks, Democrats and Republicans had an issue, is like this could create a pretext for stopping people that you just don't like the way they look. So, guy saw a cigarette, thought that person, the other guy in the car was 17, stopped the car.
It was pointed out that Maine has had this law in effect since I think 2008.
Yeah, I think that's
and they average about 10 stops a year.
Yeah, that's right.
So what does that tell us? That police are not interested in enforcing this law? It's too much trouble because of the reasons you've been stating? I
think that's probably right. And also, I suspect, as in Connecticut, the Maine police probably have more important things to do. Mm-hmm. Not that, secondhand smoke is not important, but for the criminal justice system or for the police, it's just one other thing that may look great on paper, but it's practically, it'll probably not be executed like up in Maine, but also could create other issues.
Let me stick with health for a moment. Allow eligible patients to try investigational drugs, biological products, or devices. In other words, someone who has really run out of options that are above, that are considered the norm.
Mm-hmm. It's again, we run afoul on this stuff, it seems like every year now, when we sort of cross into what arguably is a federal arena. We have a federal Food and Drug Administration that tests and licenses what type of drugs are acceptable in this country, what type of licensing is acceptable in terms of giving out drugs or medical practice. And then we sort of sneak up on it. Listen, I'm a states' rights guy. But what you end up doing is sort of bumping into each other on good standard of care, which everyone agrees, and then experimental stuff. So how does this work in real life? If somebody has no other options and wants to experiment with other drugs, they just do it. The state's not coming in to stop these people. It's not happening. But what you do is when you enshrine it,
but don't those who provide these services have to worry?
Yeah, potentially. That's right. It's happening now. So what happens? So the state creates sort of a quasi-loose licensing, I use licensing in quotes, structure that allows not even pharmacists, whoever's supplying the experimental drug, the ability to do that. Well, obviously there's room for abuse there, outside of the intended target. And it runs afoul of the way we, at least for the last 60, 70 years, have run the way we do pharmaceuticals and drugs and whatnot. I think, frankly, if there's sort of a avenue to push this maybe at the federal level or maybe by interstate compact, fine. In prosecutorial discretion actually is where I think this thing exists. If somebody wants to try whatever, and it's their last dying breath, or they're right on death's doorstep, no one's stopping it. But you're right, the folks who supply the drugs run a risk.
I'm stopping it for the moment. We're going to take a break. When we come back, let's talk about tenants' rights. Back in just a moment. Welcome back to Focus on Connecticut. Talking about issues before the Judiciary Committee. One of the bills that you're considering is shortening the time period that tenants are without essential services provided by landlords. In other words, at which point they have recourse.
Yeah, there's a couple of landlord-tenant bills. Again, we get those every year too, sort of tweak the way it is now. I mean, there's two different tracks in Connecticut with landlord-tenant law. One is the commercial setting, which I'm familiar with as a practicing lawyer, and then the residential side. The landlords constantly feel like all we do is load them with more responsibility, basically unfunded responsibility, because this is their business, this is their property, and then there's tenants in there that arguably have to go. But while the process plays out, who bears the brunt of helping or not? So yeah, that bill wasn't super hot. It kind of got wrapped up with another bill talking about getting reimbursements for cities that actually put people up in hotels and whatnot. We'll see how it plays out. I mean, it's got some traction. I think it's innocuous enough.
But it strengthens the case for the tenant.
Yeah, it does. It's definitely tenant oriented, and arguably that's the only direction we've gone in for a very long time. I mean, remember a year or two ago we had the bed bugs debate. Who was going to be responsible for remediating bed bugs?
Well, you had it this year as well.
Yeah. Well, it didn't come through Judish yet. I think it would have gone through public health, I think, or something like that. And the issue comes, well, why? Whose responsibility is to fix these problems? And that's where the debate is.
Completely different area. Erasure of criminal records. Don't we already have those laws in place?
We do.
Now, what we're talking about here is if someone is arrested and then found it was an improper arrest, or the judge says this criminal record can be eliminated.
Right. Well, there's a couple of different flavors of bills going through now about erasure of records. Some is in connection with pardons, some in connection with provisional pardons. So those are folks who actually been convicted, and then what happens? There is a bill going through now on criminal records. Someone who's applying for a job, if and when the employer can actually ask to see or about those records. And then there's this. There is a procedure now that if you're acquitted or if the charges are dropped, that the records can be sealed or expunged, but apparently it's clunky and it doesn't work as well. So what we're looking at now is a way to sort of make it better. And frankly, I'm okay with that. If someone was arrested improperly or is acquitted, maybe there should be sort of a lock on some of that information. It's hard to say because the flip side is there are a lot of folks who, let's say they get arrested 20 times in their life, they get convicted at 5 of those 20. Well, those other 15 are still relevant to an examination of who we're dealing with, and whether the examination's by a prosecutor or by an employer. Well, that's kind of where the rub is. That's why I said there's 3 or 4 different tranches of criminal records bills going through right now.
There's another level to this, which is not before the committee, but often before us in the media. And that is people saying, I was arrested, the case was thrown out of court, the court has erased my records, you haven't. Your story is on your website, it doesn't go away, and every time I go for a job, it's thrown in my face. I want it off your website, or I want it wherever you keep your newspaper records or whatever.
That's right. And it strikes up some freedom of the press issues obviously, because whatever you're reporting hopefully did happen, and hopefully it's reported accurately, because if Mr. Jones was arrested for X and was acquitted, well, hopefully that gets reported too. Yeah, I know that's a problem that a lot of newspapers and TV now, especially since the internet stuff lives on forever in the ether. Yeah, that's a private matter that I don't know that we're going to legislate there anytime soon. I think you got to take care of that, Tom.
We're doing our best to keep
things,
up
to you.
To maintain the status quo on this.
Right.
Our stance, just for the record, is that you can't rewrite history.
That's right.
That arrest took place, whether it was right or wrong. And yes, we should update the story,
yep,
to the full disclosure of what happened.
And I think that solves the problem from a civil legal side. If you're accurate, you're accurate. It happened.
Drones legislation. Let me just read a little bit of this because it's bizarre, and a little over the top. Establish the crime of using computer software or technology. Establish the crime of using the software and technology, including a drone, which allows someone who is not physically present to release tear gas or control a deadly weapon, explosive, or incendiary device. We're going to talk about this right after a break.
Science fiction.
Welcome back to this week's edition of Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. Our guest is State Representative John Shaban of Easton, Reading, and Weston, member of the Judiciary Committee. And we're talking about this drone bill. Wouldn't it be illegal to do all of those things? Use a drone for tear gas or weapons or bombs or whatever.
You would think so, right? So, yeah, it almost takes on a taste of science fiction to say, you could launch some kind of quasi attack against your neighbor from above, but this is the times in which we live.
So there is a need for this legislation.
Is there a need? I don't know that it's happened. I mean, the real need for drone legislation, and we've been working on this for a couple of years too. It's gone through PRI and a few other committees, is to figure out how, I think, more importantly, how police are going to use drones. Whether or not they have a probable cause or reasonable suspicion to look at what somebody's doing, in the privacy of their home or over the top of a fence or whatnot. So part of the effort in these bills focuses more on that. But yeah,
well, we should talk about that though. It limits
right.
what police. They have to let people know in advance that they're using it. Well, doesn't that
arguably
undo the whole goal of using the drone in the first place?
Yeah, arguably it does. There's been flyovers with helicopters and planes for a long time, but I think the thrust now is to require some kind of a warrant. Get a warrant. If you're going to do surveillance, you get a warrant, and if it's done by drone, so be it.
But then you also have to tell the person about whom the warrant has been drawn.
Unless there's an emergency or an emergency situation, that's right. And that's not entirely different from what we do now. I mean, if you're going to, because if the drone is in your airspace, quote unquote, your airspace, arguably you're supposed to let the folks, you get a search warrant, you knock on the door saying, I have a warrant, here's the warrant, we're coming in. Sort of the same thing. There's room to tweak that back and forth. I mean, the part everyone focuses on is, banning weaponized drones. It's like, well, because you read it and it's like, you're kidding me, people are doing that. I don't know that they are, but obviously you could.
Well, actually, there was a case in Connecticut in which someone did do that. Not that they used it for anything.
But they tried to weaponize it. So they're buying pretty fancy drones. You can get them a Radio Shack.
It's just that, so I put a bomb on a drone and I set the bomb off.
Yeah.
Haven't I broken the law just
Yes.
by setting off the bomb?
I
Why
agree.
do I need to add more legislation?
I'm not sure you do, but I think it's the act of weaponizing the drone, period, but without doing anything else, is what this legislation is going to be aimed at. Again, I'm not sure I'm going to support it because it's still getting cooked in a whole bunch of different directions, because I agree with you. It's sort of already illegal. I mean, what's happening is you get Yahoo teenage kids throwing fireworks on a drone and flying it to their buddy's house, and okay, what are we doing there? Is that
Now you've given them an idea.
No, trust me, they had it already.
Okay. Increase the penalty for subsequent animal abuse offenses.
Yeah, I support that bill.
Are there many cases of this?
There aren't a whole lot, but there are enough. It's two reasons that the bill's moving forward. A, there's enough of them, and B, there's been a research link between folks who abuse animals, at least habitually, and folks who end up abusing people. So, and there's some arguments about whether or not that research is well connected, fully fleshed out and whatnot. But I've read it, and I think it's compelling enough to suggest that if you are repeatedly abusing an animal, there's a problem there, and it's something that should get on the radar screen of law enforcement.
So what does this call for?
I forget. I think if it's the second, basically it amps up fines and potential prison time. And there's carve-outs there because obviously if you're a farmer and you're taking your animals to slaughter, that's not a criminal offense. That's already in the law as it exists. So it's really what this bill is proposing to do is just amp up the fines and potential prison. So.
We're going to take one last break. We'll stay with the animals, talk about kids and therapy animals.
Yeah.
When we come back. Just a few minutes left with John Shaban. This is the instance in which a child is involved in criminal prosecution. He's been abused,
right.
She's been abused, and they're being questioned. And this is to allow a therapy animal to be with the child.
Yeah, and again, there's been some research to suggest that helps the child through the experience, and I don't think.
So right now you're not allowed to do this?
Well, I don't think anyone contemplated it. Therapy animals in the courtroom is sort of I haven't seen it. Okay. But I think the bill. There's a couple of tweaks that have to happen. I can't remember what they are, real technical stuff. But I think the bill will move forward because it's just a common sense measure.
Revise the statutes on credit card fraud to include debit cards. So they've been excluded till now.
Well, I think it was a definitional issue because a credit card is defined as a yada 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 yada, and a debit card doesn't fit that definition. So it's really just it's basically making it illegal to do the same activity, but including within the definition what a debit card is and what a credit card is, because they're different things.
Talking about debits, let's talk about the budget for a moment. Legislature acted this week.
Yep.
But did not reach that 900 million deficit.
No. It's the Appropriations Committee came out with their version, or the first cut at a version of a bill of the budget fix, and it's still $350 million short. I mean, we just fixed last year's budget, which goes till June, which was $220-ish million, and we did that by taking money from everywhere and everything and sweeping it in. Had to get done. So it was bipartisan. We kind of worked together to try and make it fast because we got to finish this year. Going forward, what my half of the room and others are looking for is more structural changes. The same stuff, frankly, we've been talking about for years. So we don't run into this problem every year, because here we are again. 6 years ago, $3.5 billion in the hole, raised taxes historically. Still 2 years later, still in the hole, raised taxes again. Here we are 4 years later, $3.5 billion deficit for the next budget cycle. So we've been going in the wrong way for a long time, and by just, unfortunately what's going to happen now is people who need help are going to get hurt. We're going to cut education, we're going to cut services to the needy, we're going to cut mental health services. I mean, people who need help are going to get hurt because we have not run our fiscal house properly. I mean, bad fiscal management leads to poor public policy, and hoping it goes away doesn't get it done, and it hasn't. So there's going to be a bloodletting, and it's unfortunate. I mean, 6 years ago, I used the analogy yesterday, I think, on the House floor or on the committee floor. We could have walked down a fire escape slowly, changing our route, reducing the size of our government, changing the way, where our services are provided. So we could have walked down the fire escape. Now we're jumping off a burning building. I mean, that's what's left. And we still have the 300, with the bill came out, there's still $300 million
well, the governor's
to
going to
the governor's going to take
proposal.
a shot aside. It's coming out today or Monday. I think they're working on it now.
We're taping this Friday morning, by the way.
Exactly. So we'll see where that comes. But there's going to be layoffs. There's going to be massive cuts to services. They're talking about cutting educational cost sharing across the board. Some towns, massive cuts. Some towns not as bad. So yeah, we're hitting all the things that we, as a government, the stuff that everybody says you want to do is you want to promote education, you want to create a safety net, you want to help those who need that the most. We're cutting all of that because we haven't run the fiscal house the way it needs to get run. We're out of money.
We're almost out of time. Less than 2 minutes. As if Connecticut's problems aren't bad enough, you're running for Congress.
I am.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it's repeated head trauma as a child, playing football, or who knows. No, having been up in the State House for the last 6 years and watching us constantly come up short on the way we fund and fix things, the way we run our business, and then looking on the other side of the ledger or the other side of the fence and seeing that this state gives almost the most money to the federal government and gets back almost the least to the federal government, and for state functions, education, infrastructure, environmental programs. I said, there's got to be a better way to run this. Because why give $1, get back 60 cents, 65 cents with an instruction book on how to spend your own money? I said, I got an idea, let's just keep the dollar and spend it the way we want. And so it really derives from this inside look, or looking under the hood of the way the state's been suffering, frankly, for a long time. We don't manage our own resources well enough, including the fact we don't keep enough of our own resources. I mean, Fairfield County is one of the wealthiest counties in the country, and we still have failing schools. How's that possible? We still have roads and trains that don't work the way they should. How's that possible? Well, it's because we give away we give away too much of our resources to a federal government that's not answerable to us. It's not. So let's keep the local dollars here to fix the local problems. That's why I'm running.
Got it. Thank you for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned. The news continues.